Microphone check, microphone check. Hey, what's up? This is Rachel Cancino-Neal, health restoration coach and nutritional therapy practitioner in training. I'm here with my hubby, Derek Neal.
Hey guys.
To continue our conversation with Liz Rana, my best friend for life, about trauma and self-awareness. And we're actually going to give some definitions this time that we may or may not have done last time. And we're also going to be focusing on brain and body connections, how to find a good trauma counselor, and resources for you to consider as you start your healing journey.
Nice.
Are you ready to do that?
Let's go.
All right, let's do this. We had some great interaction with first part of our conversation with Liz, and from that we did receive some great questions to help guide our conversation the second time around. So thank you for that, my two listeners who did that. If you are tuning into this podcast and you do have questions that are just tugging at your soul, I implore you, please comment and ask them. I am a trained teacher.
And she's really good.
I'm really good. And so your questions actually help me to teach you even better. So if there's something that you need clarification on or it's not making sense to you, please comment. And if we get enough of them, we can actually hold an episode just for that to answer those kind of questions. Okay. So with that said, I do want to do some review before we move on. You ready for this nervous system review?
I got it.
Okay. So, as I'm quizzing Derek, I want you, dear listeners, to quiz yourself, because isn't that the funnest thing? I personally think quizzing myself, I pop quiz myself all the time.
You're constantly doing that.
I'm constantly doing it. So I think it's fantastic. So if you are like me, or you're not, that's okay. You're still gonna be quizzed. Derek, are you ready for this question?
All right.
The nervous system has two main divisions. One is the peripheral nervous system. What is the other division called?
That would be the central nervous system.
Oh, my dear sweet husband. Did you peek?
I did not peek.
Your eyes were open, but you were looking away from your paper. So he didn't cheat. He knew it. Yay!
High five for me.
Yeah. Okay, second part of that question. You did get central nervous system. Can you tell me the parts that are involved in the central nervous system?
Ooh, that one would be the brain.
Yes.
And the spinal cord.
Yes. A plus, Derek Neal. A plus.
Yes.
Listeners, how'd you do? If you got the answers correct, comment, say, I did it. Okay? I did it. There you go. There you go. Okay. Yes. So central nervous system involves the brain and spinal cord. Everything outside of that is considered the peripheral nervous system. Okay. Do you remember when we made that fist?
Yes.
Okay. We made the number 4 and we wrapped the fingers over that thumb and then we looked at it and we said, oh, this looks like the central nervous system. When we're looking at a forearm, that reminds us of the spinal cord. When we look at the wrist, that reminds us of the brainstem. And then when we look at the fist, that reminds us of the brain. These are all the different parts of the central nervous system. Okay? This central nervous system interacts with the peripheral. So in the peripheral is where we have our sensory organs, the things that we smell, taste, see, sensations.
Got it.
The main area that we can voluntarily control are skeletal muscles. Those are our main things. So basically, when I flex my biceps in the mirror to check them out, and you accidentally see me checking out my biceps, which
happened just a couple nights ago.
Yes. True. But hey, I was enjoying my nervous system flexing my muscles. So that is more of an example of a voluntary movement. Other things that are involved in that peripheral may not be directly affected. We can't affect them. One example would be heart rate. Your heart rate responds to central nervous system signals. We can have indirect control of heart rate when we control our breathing. That's one way. But most of these responses are considered involuntary movements.
Okay.
Okay? Every day, all day, our body is receiving information. Okay? Right now, my body's receiving information. I'm getting cold air blasted on me. Okay? Even though I'm not touching it with my hand, I am feeling it. My body, my skin is sensing it. That gets sent up to my spinal cord, up the brainstem to my brain, because at this point I'm getting a little chilled. So I'm becoming aware of these changes. Okay? In a healthy body, in a healthy nervous system, your reticular activating system that's located in your brainstem will filter out 99% of the information. When the information comes up fully to the brain, that means you're going to have a brain arousal. Okay? The fastest way the brain gets activated is through a dangerous threat that your body is sensing.
Yep.
Okay? So in those cases, reticular activating system will signal emotional brain, and brain says, whoa, need to respond, and it's going to send out the signals super quick to respond to that threat. Okay? So again, spinal cord, brain, central nervous system, everything else, your sensory organs are the main example of your peripheral. That's accessing information, sending it the spinal cord up to brain responds, sends it out to what to do.
Got it.
All right.
Yeah, and I totally remember how you were talking about the RAS and how much information it actually is supposed to be filtering out when you have that healthy body.
Right.
But I do also remember you saying something that the RAS can be affected by, like, trauma, abuse, neglect, probably even stress.
Yeah. Honestly, there are so many different things that can cause the nervous system to get amped up, right? Infections, food allergies, seasonal allergies, you overly exercise, lack of sleep. All of these things cause the nervous system to become more amped up. All of this, like trauma, that can go undealt with, can lead the RAS to be really hypervigilant, and it allows for more brain arousal because your body is sensing something's dangerous, threatening, that there's something lurking that it has to respond to. Okay, is that all kind of make sense right there?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So all of this arousal can lead to hyperactivity in the brain. And then that can cause a fight or flight response to go, go, go. And then that fight or flight response continues a stress response. So then you're kind of in the cycle of stress response, fight or flight, hyperactivity, fight. So you're
just over and over
and over. Okay. So it becomes harder and more difficult for that body to kind of just settle down. So some signs that maybe you're in that fight or flight response often might be something like you can't think straight, right? I have said in this time of stress in our lives, I just feel like my brain is just like not communicating, right? Or I can't help it, it just happens. These are statements that are actually red flags. So if we go back to that tree analogy, if we're looking at the tree, we have our trunk, we have our branches and all the leaves. It's like when we're in that chronic state, it's like lightning has struck a branch, that branch is like dead. And so it can't communicate and get the information that it needs anymore. And that just stresses out the brain.
Yeah.
In our brains, healing can occur, but first, you need to open the door for communication between emotional brain and thinking brain.
Right. So can I kind of recap that just to make sure I'm understanding that?
Yeah.
So basically, what you're saying is the nervous system can't calm down, which also makes me realize that if we can't slow down, then we can't really rest.
Right.
Okay? And if we can't rest, then this whole rest and digest thing, which you're constantly talking about, it can't happen.
Right.
Okay? Kind of tying that back into digestion. Digestion doesn't really occur unless you're in that rest and digest, correct?
Well, it occurs, it just doesn't work as in full functioning.
Okay, so basically then, if you're not in that rest and digest, then you're not able to digest your food in the
as
proper way.
Right.
So you're not getting the full nutrients, the
Right.
the benefits of what you're eating.
Right. And
Okay.
the bummer part of that is that nutritional deficiencies also stress out the body. So it's this really vicious cycle, which is why we're having a conversation that we are having about undealt with trauma or unhealed trauma.
Right.
Okay? That's why these things are so important for us to look at, because I think often there's like this barrier between mental health and physical health. And we're used to like talking about things that in fact impact our physical health. Mm-hmm. Oh, I need to exercise, or I need to eat right, or I have allergies, so my nose gets runny. We recognize certain things that we can physically feel, like readily feel, right? I ate that thing and it bothered me. I think there's a disconnect though, that when we start thinking about quote unquote mental health, we separate that out. I actually saw a billboard that said mental health is as important as physical health. And I just laughed because I'm like, it's the same thing. They are not separate entities. Right? What is going on in your brain, in your mind, is impacting your body because they work together all the time.
Right.
Okay? So unhealed trauma is a part of that picture too. Right? Whether or not you realize it, your body, your nervous system senses danger. It feels like things are just lurking, right? So it becomes hypervigilant, hyper-aware, which can create hyperactivity within the mind. Fight or flight response.
Right. Okay. Which, all of that makes so much sense. Just that cycle that you can get stuck in.
Right.
So, I'm excited to start talking with Liz to kind of see what she has to say about this.
Yeah. All right, let's jump into that conversation with Liz.
Let's go.
I'm happy to welcome back my best friend, Liz. Welcome to our humble abode here.
No. Sorry.
Here's Liz.
Thank you for having me.
Liz, I'm so glad you're joining us here again. This time Derek is here, and we're in my house, which means that extra distractions. We have 5 animals that are potentially going to interrupt, and 2 children that are potentially going to interrupt. But this is perfect. This is perfect. It was great. Okay, so last time you did such a great job, Liz.
Thank you.
Of walking us through trauma, big T trauma, little T trauma, self-awareness. So I think it's already helpful to people. And there, you probably hear my dog barking. There we go. So before we get into all the trauma and self-awareness talk again, can you tell us a bit about who you are, Liz?
Right.
Who are you?
Beyond my qualifications of being Rachel's BFFL.
Yeah. That's the most important one.
Great reason to be invited on the podcast as an expert.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, so my background is that after college, I got a master's degree in special education. I was a special education, self-contained teacher at a high school for 7 years. And at the same time, I was also a youth pastor. And then at the end of that journey, I decided to go back to school again and get my master's in clinical mental health counseling. And right now I am a provisionally licensed professional counselor working on my full licensure. And I work exclusively with foster youth between the ages of 16 and 21.
Okay, so at the end of our last episode, we left off with how to find a good counselor.
Oh, yeah.
So we're going to talk about that in a moment. But first, I want to refresh our minds about big T trauma and little T traumas. So if you can give us a recap on that, okay. And then what actually qualifies as quote-unquote trauma.
Trauma is anything we experience that overwhelms our nervous system's ability to cope.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I do remember you talking about that.
Yes.
So anything that overwhelms our nervous system in its ability to cope.
Yep.
Well, that's a really broad spectrum of stuff.
Because it is.
Yeah.
Because, like we talked about, some people could experience the same thing and one be traumatized and one not.
Yeah.
And, someone can experience a divorce as a kid and be traumatized, and another person that might be just the thing they needed and not be traumatized, but be relieved.
Yeah.
Like, you can experience all sorts of things. Here's a crazy story, and you can cut it out if you need to. But it's true. There's one kid who one of my professors encountered who had developed really bad patterns of behavior, qualified for oppositional defiance disorder. And the ultimate thing that caused this was her dad had tied a string around her tooth to pull it out. But he said he wasn't going to do it. He's like, okay, I won't, because she got scared. And she's like, no, don't. And he was like, okay. And then he yanked it anyways. And the betrayal of her trust literally traumatized her. I mean, it overwhelmed her system, and it all just went from there.
Wow.
And I mean, literally, so when I say anything that overwhelms your nervous system's ability to cope, well, that overwhelmed her nervous system.
Wow. Yeah, because for the other kids, it might be like, oh, that was funny. You tricked me.
Right, like, hey, Dad, and then they'll get over it.
Yeah.
But you just, it can be very individual.
Yeah.
So, a short recap on the difference between big T trauma and little T trauma. Big T trauma are singular incidents. They just happen one time, like a weather event, like a hurricane or a tornado, or a car accident, or something of experiencing like violence.
Like one violent episode.
Yeah, like if you got mugged or something in an alleyway. That usually cause your classic PTSD symptoms. And honestly are also much simpler to treat because you're just healing the one incident. And then little T trauma can be either a smaller incident, not often considered trauma, like I mentioned earlier, like divorce, for example. It could be something like that. More often it is a series of tinier traumas that you experience over time, that because you're experiencing them for a prolonged amount of time, they end up having the same, and actually worse, effects on your nervous system. And it often, most often is emotional abuse and emotional neglect that you might experience in childhood. But I mean, there are other chronic abuses that you could experience that would be considered little T trauma. So it is kind of a wide variety, but the detail that makes it stand out is it usually wouldn't be considered traumatic in itself the one time.
Right.
So.
Right, but it goes on. So, again, if you look at that definition of anything that overwhelms the nervous system and its ability to cope, is that what you said? Yeah.
Then I can't cope with it.
Right. So that really is so many different things. And if it's like you said one time, then okay. But if you have it over and over, like it's a disappointed look from your dad's face, or those slight little comments of like, well, you should have done better, then,
Yeah.
So you had said last time, too, that trauma and shame often go hand in hand. And so when you're talking about the little T trauma and those ongoing incidents of slight insult, facial expressions, all that, I can totally see how shame gets worked into that as you're dealing with this trauma, because it comes down to your personhood. Rather than like PTSD would be like, well, that was the event that caused this.
Right. It doesn't feel usually as personal.
Yeah.
Like, it's not my fault a tornado came through my neighborhood.
Right. That just happened. Yeah. And people are more, they can accept that a lot easier than saying, well, my dad always said I wasn't good enough.
Right.
It's, okay, we'll suck it up, buttercup, and get over it. And it's very different. So it's not as accepted socially, I would say. Yeah,
they are treated differently as well, which then complicates our acknowledgement and treatment of the little T traumas.
Right. Derek, got any insights over there?
No.
Derek is very thrilled to be sitting here with this conversation. Okay, so then when we're talking about trauma, we're talking about self-awareness as well. So basically, if you want to heal from trauma, whether it's that one-time thing or ongoing, then you have to become self-aware, right? Otherwise, the emotional brain just kind of takes over and you can't really think about things. So we have to become self-aware. But it was brought to my attention by a listener, aka my stepdad, when he pointed out we didn't really define what self-awareness is, and because it's such like a catchy phrase right now, we want to make sure that we define what it is that we are saying is self-awareness. the way I understand it is that you bring either thoughts or even like your bodily like sensations to the forefront of your mind. We're actually focusing attention to either those thoughts or the sensation that you're having in your body. So when I'm saying self-aware, that's how I understand it. Would you agree with that definition, or you have something else that kind of goes?
No, that's a great general definition. Paying attention, to what's happening in the here and now and being present definitely will help you develop self-awareness. So for me, when I was referring to self-awareness, I was really thinking about developing insight into why we do what we do. Because a lot of people develop behavioral and thought patterns throughout life. Right. And then once you have a habit, you're just doing stuff and you're not thinking about it. Or you can get caught in bad habits and they happen so automatically you barely know what you're doing anymore. Yeah. And so having to stop in the here and now, pay attention to what's happening, and then also take the time to develop insight and make those connections into where some of those habits started. And I think a lot of times we struggle with that because we can be so dismissive and avoidant of like little T trauma in the past, right? That we think that was no big deal. Yeah. But it can be things that feel insignificant that shaped us and caused us to act the way we do today. Yeah. And so nothing should, no stone should go unturned if you're trying to change your life. Right. So basically paying attention, developing insight so we can understand what we're feeling, what we're thinking, and why we're doing what we're doing. To me, that is what I was thinking of when we say developing self-awareness.
Okay, so kind of combination of those two, of like bringing it to thought, but then really trying to discover and get curious, as my counselor likes to say, get curious about like, why is it that I have that belief? Why do I have that thought? Why do I think that is right? Kind of exploring those things. And it can be very revealing and shocking sometimes when you're like, wow, that came from this thing that happened that long ago,
Right. Can I add it in there? Yeah. I think in Christian culture, if it's okay to bring it to that.
Oh, yeah.
I'm pretty sure a lot of your listeners probably have a Christian background. Yeah. A lot of times we get this message about like we need to leave our past behind. Yes.
The old is gone, the new is here. Yeah.
And all that stuff. And now when it comes to terms of like forgiving yourself and things like that, of course, like that's what Jesus does, and that's what we get the freedom to do as well, is to not have to continue to hold shame over our past sins that are under the blood of Christ, things like that. However, we can also get that mixed message that if I'm thinking about the past or feeling something about the past, that's bad, so shove that down, move forward. But really a better way might be paying attention. If you're still thinking about it, that's probably a thing you need to process. That's a thing that you're right. We do want to move forward from that. Right. But you don't move forward by just shoving something down. Right. And so I think as Christians, we sometimes get those mixed messages and don't know what to do with stuff that's coming up from the past. But part of developing self-awareness is letting ourselves process the things that continually come up so that we can then move forward.
Right. Which that reminds me of the book Who Switched Off My Brain by Dr. Caroline Leaf. And she talks about it's a renewal process. And so like you were talking about, like we create these like neural pathways with habits that we create, right? And so the more often you go down that pathway, the easier it becomes, the less you think about it, to the point where you're like, well, I just do that. I don't know why I do it. I just do it. Well, if you're starting to say that kind of stuff, like, well, I just react that way. I don't know why. Okay, like we said in our review section of like, we need to put in like a break and say, if I'm saying that I'm reacting this way, I can discover why I'm reacting this way. But it's going to take you to take a pause and like really think about, self-reflect, become self-aware, and then as a Christian, bring it to God, like, hey, I need your help with the renewal process right now. And He graciously protects our minds as we're discovering, because some of that stuff is scary to uncover. Yes. And He promises that He can protect those areas as we're going through a renewal process. But it's not like He just zaps it and we forget all of our previous life. Right. He can use it. So true. He can transform it. But yeah, and graciously he can do that, and it's to our benefit actually that he does it that way. Yeah.
That's good.
Derek, anything over there yet?
Thank you for that. I'm not even on my script yet.
He's not ready. He's waiting for the right one.
Listen.
We just want to give you opportunities.
I'm looking for
Derek.
Dr. Caroline Leaf. I'm like, I don't remember that during the practice. Where are
We're
we?
freestyling.
We're embracing the conversation. Okay, well, Derek still doesn't have anything. Maybe later.
It's okay, Derek.
No shame. I'm not shaming you. It's
all right. I can tell you're absorbing it all.
Yes.
I am.
He's taking it in. Hands on the forehead. Face is turning
I feel like
red.
I'm in college trying to keep up. And I never did.
If my dear listeners remember one of the episodes where he started panicking and getting stressed, we are again witnessing such things.
Aww.
Right back there.
It's okay. I won't call on you again until it's your turn.
I just hope I'm ready then.
Okay, so we're talking about the trauma and a traumatized person. Okay, that's different from just a traumatic event. So a traumatic event does not equal a traumatized person, like you were talking about car wreck, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So in the book Waking the Tiger, Peter Levine talks about, or Levine.
I don't know, man.
I don't know either. Okay, so he talks about this difference as well. And I thought, because of my education as being a health restoration coach and nutritional therapy practitioner, he talks about that poor health, ongoing stress, fatigue, and poor nutrition can set up a person to become traumatized after a traumatic event. Which we can get into all that later about the whys. Not in this episode, because I got enough to talk about.
Okay.
We're not talking about that. But it is really interesting. So are there like general or potential symptoms that a person can display after a negative event, a traumatizing event, that can let that person know that they might be experience the trauma or they become traumatized by that event?
Right. Just some like symptoms.
Yes.
Yes, definitely. So honestly, there can be so many different symptoms of trauma, but there are some kind of general groups that they tend to fall into.
Okay.
So one major group of traumatic symptoms, PTSD symptoms, is intrusive symptoms. So meaning like recurrent and involuntary, usually intrusive thoughts, intrusive dreams, memories, flashbacks, and also, just FYI, the difference between a big T and little t trauma, both do tend to have flashbacks. Big T can tend to be, for example, someone who is in like war. All right, so when they have a flashback, usually they're smelling, feeling like they're there again, experiencing it right now. Now, for like a little T, often you'll have like an emotional flashback where you're feeling the same like emotion, even though the situation right now is not the same. You'll feel usually like an exaggerated emotional response to things, stuff like that. So it can vary, but you would still essentially have intrusive symptoms with trauma. Just any kind of like prolonged or involuntary psychological or like physiological reactions to any kind of like triggers specific to that trauma. There's this thing that like a lot of times people with chronic trauma will start to like shake uncontrollably or like chatter their teeth even though it's not cold, things like that.
Chronic trauma meaning little t trauma, right?
Yeah.
Same thing. Okay.
Chronic abuse tends to have an effect like that, but it could also be someone who had a big T trauma that was just triggered really badly.
Okay.
So like kind of physiological markers. So one category would be intrusive symptoms. Another would be avoidance. And we kind of touched on that the last time.
One. Yeah.
So avoiding either a physical place or avoiding the emotions of what happened, but you try to avoid anything familiar to that traumatic thing.
Yeah.
Negative this is sounding so clinical, but
No.
negative cognition and mood, big T and little t will,
so negative cognition means you can't think right. Your thinking processes have been hampered.
Affected.
Yeah.
So there could be dissociation. There could be, honestly, just impacted thought life, like believing all of somebody, one group of people are bad now because you had, or something like that.
Right.
Like,
it's like
negative beliefs about yourself, about the world, that the people around you know are not true.
Right.
But like, because of that trauma, because your whole body is now wired to avoid, because you fear that thing, you hold to this like not true belief.
Right.
So very like persistent negative emotional state as well, like guilt, shame, anger, fear, loss of interest with engaging with people is usually
the isolation,
and usually a loss of positive emotions. So I mean, we're kind of also describing depression, but like hopelessness, things like that. And then so that's 3. The other big, I would say, group of symptoms would come in under hyperarousal. So hypervigilance, sometimes reckless and self-destructive behaviors, that exaggerated startle that you kind of described, and sleep disturbances are a big one. Not being able to sleep or having restless sleep, or so those kind of big main 4 categories, and obviously there's a lot of things that can fit under those,
right?
But what they all have in common is, if you were actually right now in a situation where you were in danger, you would be fearful, you would not be able to sleep, you would be on guard, you would be preparing for battle or what, like, it's like being in that state when there is no danger.
Right.
So,
Wow. I'm having a lot of reflections going on right now, because I'm not going to go into all of it, because again, we don't have time for all that. But it's just really interesting hearing all the different ones. And I'm seeing like there's a chart that I've seen before where you're sympathetic, so that fight or flight response starts to spike, and it becomes like too much for your body, so then it switches over to that parasympathetic, that rest, and too much of that can lead to depression. And so it's common that people will have a huge spike, they're on guard, and they're going, parasympathetic hits in, and then they're depressed because their body's saying, oh my gosh, like I need to slow down. And then after some time, it revs up again. And so you just kind of keep in this huge fluctuations of emotions, because your nervous system, the parasympathetic, sympathetic, is trying to like regulate, and it can't. I looked at Derek to see if he had any thoughts, and his eyebrows just raised. So no, he's telling me through his body language,
use your superpowers. See, hear, feel.
Don't ask me anything. So I won't, spouse. I won't. Okay. So Liz, back to you.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay. So piggybacking off of symptoms of trauma that's gone undealt with, unhealed, what are some consequences that can start happening? And another question we need clarification on also is the difference between dissociation and, this word is really hard for me to say, compartmentalization.
Starting with, if we leave trauma unattended, big T or little t, doesn't matter, what happens is that it controls our life. Because it's, like we've actually said a few times, it keeps us stuck. We feel like we are in danger. We feel like we are experiencing the things that we experienced in the past right now, even though they're not happening. So it keeps you stuck, and that keeps it, like, your whole brain and body is trying to protect itself. So it's going to bend and morph its way to avoid the things that we're consciously or unconsciously perceiving as danger. And that's why self-awareness is so important, because it can be happening and us not necessarily recognize it.
Right.
And that's dangerous.
Yeah.
We want to be in control of our choices. And I say that, and I can like hear the Christian in the back being like, self-control is a fruit of the Spirit, and like you always have control. And anyone who's had to fight the battle of trying to use their will when their whole body and brain is feeling danger knows that is so much easier said than done.
Yes. So I'm reading that book you recommended, The Soul of Shame, and he made a statement that I was like, wow. He said that God has to use the same neural pathways that your friends, your family, and acquaintances have to use. And so, like, if your brain has gone through, I was listening to another book, and it was talking about how emotional trauma is the same as going through a brain injury, right? So a physical injury accident is the same as going through emotional trauma, and your brain injury after so many years. And she's talking about, she had a big T trauma moment in her life. But just that statement that emotional trauma can have the same brain injuring effects as a physical trauma that can happen is something that we really do need to consider. And as Christians, again, that's the whole renewing of the mind. That God doesn't say like you're just gonna, yes, you are born again, yes, you are made new, but there's like a process into that.
Yeah.
Right? And
sanctification.
So, right.
We talk about it.
Yeah. But do we really believe it? It's like my stepdad says, he said, you need to be more focused on the progress over like completion. So look at how you're making progress. Know that the goal is completion over here, but as humans, we're probably never going to get there to be complete until, if you do believe in the Bible, the Bible says that we are done with this life and with God and everything's restored. But anyways, go ahead.
Right. The answer to that question is just that it will have a strong, powerful effect on you, if not control you.
Right.
And man, and I think we talk a lot. We've been talking a lot about that, how it impacts your body, how it impacts your mind, your habits, your choices, but also it totally impacts you spiritually.
Yeah.
It impacts your relationship with God. It impacts how you see Him.
Yeah.
And so it's holistically will impact you, and left untreated, it will just continue to inhibit you from healing. And some people feel like they can live with that, I think. Yeah. And they just kind of get in that stuck place and stay there. And so, but if you're the type of person who doesn't want to stay stuck and wants to change, then you're going to have to
do it. You have to take some painful steps.
Do the work. So your other question about the difference between dissociation and compartmentalization, I know comes from what we talked about last week, because I was describing my experience with dissociation, and I'm so glad we're clarifying this week, because I want to be really clear, because there is a difference.
Okay.
I would say the two main words to describe the difference are awareness and choice. So, compartmentalization, you're right, that's hard.
That is hard. That's a hard word.
Compartmentalization is a choice we make, all right? So, it's consciously putting our thoughts or emotions to the side. Usually it's a pretty healthy coping mechanism. So, like, if you had a rough day at work and you're like, I don't want this anger I'm feeling right now to impact my kids and my wife or whatever, and you come home and you decide, okay, I'm going to deal with that tomorrow, I'm putting this aside, you are making a choice, and you are still aware of what happened at work, and you're going to deal with it tomorrow. So, just because you're putting it aside for now, you didn't, like, lose complete awareness of it or do that accidentally. You did it on purpose. So now with dissociation, it's an automatic mechanism, not a choice. It happens like kind of unconsciously, and then
like a reflex kind of.
Yeah, like a brain reflex, we'll call it. And then also your it will be totally out of your awareness. And so my experience of dissociation It was not just, I'm going to avoid this and so I'll listen to music. Now, that was part of the symptoms of my dissociation, was an unconscious moving towards all distraction. Okay. And I have these memories of when I would, because, people talk about, like, being in the silence with the Lord, and I'd be like, I'm going to try that. And I would, like, turn things off, and then I would, like, have a meltdown. I'd be like, what's wrong with me? Like, I could not be in the quiet without it being really disruptive to me. Yeah. But, so I did have an automatic mechanism going on, where my brain would, like, I don't know, cover up, dismiss, forget certain things in a certain category. I'm going to be vague. Mm-hmm. And if and when I would remember them, it would be shocking. Mm-hmm. They were so out of my awareness, I would be shocked when they ever came back into my awareness. I would be like, oh my gosh. Like, I had no, like, recollection, and it wasn't things that, like, happened a long time ago. I wasn't being flooded. It was ongoing things. Yeah. And it would happen automatically. So there was a lack of awareness, and there was a lack of conscious choice with it. Mm-hmm. So that is the difference. Okay. To put it simply.
So that's good to know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I can definitely say that I use both of those. Mm-hmm.
Really?
The compartmentalization.
I can see that
for
one.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, if I have a stressful day at work, doing my best when I walk in the door, that it just doesn't come in with me. Yeah. But the disassociation, as you were talking about it, I know last time you had talked about just using music. You would listen to music everywhere you went. Well, for me, it's not music. If I'm trying to get away from something, I'm cleaning. I'm getting busy doing tasks because I'm wanting to avoid those emotions or uncomfortable situations. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, something that you probably do, like, unconsciously. Yeah, it's one of those things that you you can start to bring awareness to it. Like, the first step to self-awareness is just noticing when things happen. Yeah. And so next time you be cleaning, Derek, like, what's going on? Is this a dissociation?
That's exactly what my counselor told me.
You would think I'm a counselor almost. I'm getting there.
Okay. All right. So that's actually, I just learned. I thought it would be more compartmentalization. Interesting. Learning more. Okay. So before we go out to my nerd out moment, which is going to be, it's going to be a good one.
I believe you.
Yes. I was wondering if you could now answer the question about finding a good counselor, what somebody can do, what kind of authority do they have as they're trying to find a counselor. Yes. Because there are good ones and there are bad ones. I've experienced both, and the bad, it does stuff to you. It does stuff.
Yeah. Counselors are similar to, like, parents and spiritual leaders in that, man, what they say or how they treat you can have such, like, a stronger impact than your average Joe off the street. So it is really important and careful to be careful.
I'm going to interrupt real quick. If you hear whining in the back, it is my dog.
It's not me.
It's not Derek. Derek is alive and well, but our dog has been locked away, and he feels very neglected right now.
Another pet being traumatized.
So maybe we should find help for him.
A counselor? A doggy counselor?
Yeah. There are such things. There are those.
I know.
Okay. Okay, so for human counselors, what should we be looking for?
Human counselors. First of all, I think it's just important to know it's okay to shop around. A lot of people who end up in counseling are, like, people pleasers, and they don't want to fire their counselor, even if they hate them. But you know what? It's okay.
Yeah.
Definitely don't get yourself stuck in a situation that's not helping your mental health at all. Mm-hmm. It is okay to shop around. You know, if you're really looking for someone help with trauma specifically, their website should have, like, a list of their specialties. So look for that word. Look for trauma. Look for EMDR or trauma therapies on there. Also know that it's okay to ask your counselor for what you want, to interview them in the beginning or before you even meet with them. Tell them, you know, what you want to work on, and usually their response will tell you a lot about whether or not you'll be good working together. If you are giving a counselor a shot and they're saying some things that you're not sure about or you're uncomfortable with, it is okay to ask them to clarify or to tell them how you feel. Trust me, any counselor worth their salt will be grateful that you bring up anything that you're uncomfortable with or whatever.
Thank you for those tips. Thank you for those tips.
That's a thing, right?
I think so. Yeah. For finding a good counselor and the background noise of our Sully crying the whole time. This is real. Oh, gosh. Okay, well, I'm going to nerd out with you people.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. I want to remind everybody first, the major goal, or one of the major goals of this podcast, is to help you to learn about a complicated body in an uncomplicated way. Okay? And I like to give you some details in these nerd out moments because it can help your research if you choose to do further research. If you have some few technical words, it goes a lot better with what you can find. Okay, so Liz has given us a lot of insight about undealt with trauma, unhealed trauma, how it affects the body. I'm going to give you kind of like the nerdy insights, what's going on in the nervous system when we talk about that and what's going on throughout the body. Okay, so our body produces hormones and neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are the way that the nervous system communicates. These happen all day, all night, all the time without us realizing it. Hormones, neurotransmitters, okay? So the body will know which kind of hormones and neurotransmitters to produce based on the information it's getting from our outside environment and our inside environment. So outside, if there's like stress on the outside or if it's calm on the outside, same thing on the inside, our body responds to those. So that's those rest and digest, fight or flight. All right. So when we're talking about what we're talking about today with trauma, and Liz already touched on this, how our body senses danger. If trauma has gone undealt with, our body, our nervous system literally feels like there's a threat and danger all the time. And so our hormones and our neurotransmitters are going to kick our body into survival mode all the time. All right? So we start getting all kind of like amped up, and it's hard for us to slow down. So when we are amped up, which means that our nervous system, despite there not being a threat present in front of us, internally, we sense threat, right?
Yep.
So our bodies are still responding to that, which means that things that don't need to be done right now can wait. Digestion is one of those things. So we're linking it back to digestion because that's what our big idea is for foundation. That first foundation I talked about. So when we're in a fight or flight mode, our digestion slows down. So how can you tell if you're in fight or flight? Bracing thoughts, your muscles tense up. You'll feel muscle tension in your shoulders, in your calf muscles, in your legs. Your heart rate will increase. Your body temperature increases. You start breathing more into your chest rather than to your diaphragm. And you can't even sit calm in a calm way for a couple minutes.
I always be pacing. That's all I can tell.
Yeah. So there are certain things, if you really can't settle down, then your body's more than likely in that fight or flight response.
Yeah.
So if you go through that traumatic event and you haven't healed, that means it hasn't been resolved. Whatever that trauma is, big T or little t, it has not been resolved.
Yeah.
So that means your body is doing what it has to do to survive because it feels like it's still in survival mode.
Yeah.
So we get, the brain continues to get aroused. So we talked earlier about the reticular activating system that's in your brainstem. That guy is letting your brain get more aroused because it thinks danger, and because it hasn't been resolved. So eventually what starts to happen is that your brain actually starts to shift over and your whole nervous system, peripheral and central, starts to prefer excitation over relaxation. So it prefers glutamate over GABA. Literally the structures, the receptors that are there for GABA start to diminish and your body starts preferring all the excitation. Mm-hmm. So now your structure has changed that even if you can get to relaxation, your body can't get the stuff inside of the cells like it would before.
Right.
So you have structural changes that are also occurring. So your entire body, your whole nervous system is amped up. You become more agitated. You become more hyper, which leads to more stress. And now you have this nasty cycle that starts to come of the stress response, fight or flight. Stress response, fight or flight. And your body gets more and more stressed. So when we're talking about here being self-aware, you have to become honest and aware of what the heck is going on, right? Yeah. If you have trauma in your past, big T or little t, if you've heard things in your upbringing, you're hearing things now that's insulting and hurting your personhood, right? Your nervous system starts defending itself and protecting itself, okay? And so if you become aware and honest, this is how my body is feeling, this is how these statements make me feel, you're actually opening the door for your body to finally be able to access rest and getting more into the parasympathetic responses rather than sympathetic responses.
Yeah. And I bet it takes time to build that habit, to increase your capacity. Mm-hmm. They, in counselory terms, we call it your window of tolerance, and what you're talking about is widening the window. Mm-hmm. You're widening your window of tolerance. Yeah. Because when you're traumatized, your window to tolerate things is much smaller. And
is that true?
So you gotta widen it, and you can, tolerate a lot more.
Yep.
By healing trauma.
Yeah, by going through that process.
Yeah.
And letting the body calm down. Okay.
That's fascinating because I'm drawing correlations between what you can tolerate versus what I can tolerate.
I was thinking the
same thing. And it is night and day.
Yeah.
For you, it's the sounds.
Yeah.
The chaos, which I can tolerate fine.
Yeah.
And for me, it's the emotions.
Yeah.
The emotions, I just put them in a box, get to bed.
For me, it's a sensory stimulation.
For me, it's the emotions. So that's very interesting, just the difference between the two of us.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Did you also see any kind of whole body connections in that?
Oh, man. I was going ad-lib, and I had a good thought.
You did.
I don't right now.
Okay.
Because I used up my brain cells for that one.
Well, I think we can see, this is going to impact the whole body, because the nervous system impacts the entire body. So what is going on in your brain, and that's why that, mental health, physical health, they're one and the same. What goes on in your brain starts impacting everything else.
Yeah.
So let's move on to what you can do. You might be feeling a little overwhelmed by hearing all this, so let's see what you can do about that right now.
Well, I'll tell you one thing I have definitely learned in this episode is that knowing on what's going on in your mind is kind of important. So Liz, what are some other things that could be helpful for us if we're not ready to find a counselor and kind of go down that path?
And because sometimes counseling is expensive. Or sometimes the waiting lists are ridiculous.
Oh, Lord, yeah.
There's a bunch of... here's a hot tip for you, ladies and gentlemen. I hope this doesn't come back to haunt me one day. Most ethical counselors should have either a sliding scale or a scholarship-like program, but they don't always advertise it. And so one thing to do is is just to ask, call the secretary, call whoever, email, and be like, hey, do you have a sliding scale or do you have a scholarship program? Because sometimes they'll be like, yeah, we can give you 6 weeks at a reduced rate or whatever, because it's kind of built into the counseling identity to try and create as much accessible counseling as possible.
That's good to know.
So just gotta know to ask. So
yeah.
But if you're maybe don't have access, don't have the funds, or just are not ready to seek counseling, there are some really good resources out there. So book-wise, I love this book. It's called Try Softer by Andy Kolber, and I like to describe it as counseling in a book. It's the full counseling experience in a book. If you're wanting to start more, just kind of dip your toe in the spiritual end, I think we mentioned this book maybe earlier, but Emotionally Healthy Spirituality by
that's a good one.
Peter Scazzaro, I think is great at bridging the gap between Christians who were maybe raised not to pay attention as much to mental health.
Yeah.
I think it does a great job of connecting our spiritual health with our mental health and why that matters. So I love that book. Now, if you're more of a listener, Being Known podcast by Dr. Curt Thompson. He wrote The Soul of Shame. He has a wonderful podcast. It's just anything Dr. Curt Thompson is going to be good.
Okay.
But I think his podcast is probably easier to digest than his books. He's a doctor and his books are dense.
Oh, man.
But I mean, they're good, but like if your brain isn't in the mood for them, just listen to his podcast.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah. Now some really trauma related resources. This one is also very dense. However, and everything you'll ever need to know about trauma, you can find in The Body Keeps a Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Is the classic trauma book. Once again, it is dense. On the Christian end, there's a book on complex trauma called Restoring the Shattered Self by Heather Gingrich. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. But that one is going to connect also kind of our spiritual life with what complex trauma looks like. And another one that is rooted in Christianity is called Mending the Soul, Understanding and Healing Abuse. And I did not write the author's name down, but I'm doubting there's any other books.
Okay. Well, I'll put links for all of these. That way, if people are interested, they can go right there.
Perfect. Yeah. So there's kind of a mix there. And all right, I have one more recommendation. Okay. Now, hopefully this recommendation doesn't offend anyone, but this is a great tool for developing self-awareness. The Enneagram. So, if you want to get a good test, go to the Enneagram Institute website. It does cost $12, but it's the only test you'll need, and it's worth it to get an accurate kind of test on. But it really is, it's a tool for developing self-awareness. So, a lot of people have found it to be super helpful. I think people are also learning to be careful not to like make the Enneagram their identity.
Yes.
So take that with a grain of salt, but if you want to use it as a tool to maybe develop awareness in areas that you haven't really developed awareness in, that can be really useful. So.
Okay, cool.
I think it's great that so many of your resources were either books or podcasts or even just a simple test that you can take online, Liz. I mean, that kind of hits everybody, but
hopefully.
Rachel, is there other things that we could do just day to day?
Thank you for that question, Derek. So I love to learn all about the books, podcasts, seeing professionals for help when you need it. But as you end this podcast, what can you do right now? Here's a couple ideas. One, this is coming from the book Smart Moves again, and Dr. Carla Hannaford, I think I mentioned this before, talks about brain gym exercises. And there's a movement you can do that actually helps to bring down stress, that increases your focus and attention, and can help bring down anxiety. It's called hookups. And so that can actually sound like an innuendo. It is not. I'm going to describe what you do. You don't go to a bar. That is not what you do in this situation. Folks, Derek, Liz...
What you can do right now to cure your drama.
All three of us are going to do hookups together.
Okay. We're going to do the brain gym, not the physical gym of hookups. Okay. Are you ready?
Yes.
This one is good for getting your mind focused, for getting your right hemisphere and your left hemisphere communicating together.
Okay.
You ready?
Ready.
We're going to see how this goes. I'm going to put a link so people can actually see, like, a picture.
Yeah.
Because we're going to see how this goes. Okay, put your arms in front, straight out. Okay, now cross your arms over. It doesn't really matter which way you go.
Okay.
So you should have like an X going on.
Yes, ma'am.
Now turn your palms to face each other. Now put your hands together. Now interlace those fingers like you are, like you're holding somebody's hand. And then you roll your hands down then towards your chest, and you should end with your elbows are down and your fingers are pointed up towards your face. Got it?
Got it.
Yes.
Okay, and for an added bonus, you can cross at your ankles. You can hold this for 1 minute as you do some nice breathing. Or you breathe in for 6 seconds and out for, you breathe in for about 4 seconds and out 6 to 8 seconds. This will give you a chance, for those hemispheres to talk and for your body to kind of calm down. Okay, so you would do that for a minute and then you would release, switch sides, do it again. Another minute. Okay, so about 2 minutes of doing that. Now, either in addition to that, or right after that, or instead of, journaling.
Yeah.
Right, Liz?
Oh, yeah.
Journaling is really great. I struggle with journaling. I'm trying to get into it. But I recently just learned, and it was like, duh, this totally makes sense. When you're talking about journaling, like intentional journaling, what is happening is that you're bringing stuff from your emotional brain up to your thinking brain. And it doesn't just stick in your brain. When you're actually holding the writing utensil, and I'm talking about actually writing, handwriting, not just computer typing. So you're going to hold that pencil or that pen and you're going to write. You're doing literally a whole body experience, right? So you are using that central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system to engage. And all of that focus and all the attention is going to help your brain to get really engaged and your whole body to get engaged with the process.
Yeah.
So it can bring thoughts into awareness that you didn't even realize. So like my counselor recently had me journal about fear. And I was like, okay, like what do I write? She goes, oh, just write fear and your subconscious will know what to do. I laughed. I was like, okay. So then I get my journal out and I wrote, I'm supposed to write about fear, so here we go. Fear. And I was like, I know all of this stuff. So in the book, Who Switched Off My Brain, Dr. Caroline Leaf talks about the importance of getting creative with your journaling. I haven't explored this yet, but where you can use like graphs, you can use different colored, ink, you can use unlined paper, but trying to get a view of what's going on in your mind on the piece of paper.
Yeah.
So that's the goal.
Can I add another little fun fact?
Yes.
So one of the effects of trauma, especially severe trauma, that researchers have found is that it shuts off what's called the Broca's area of our brain, which is responsible for speech. Yep. So when there are traumatized people who like cannot talk about or verbalize, it usually means that it's shutting down their Broca's area, their ability to talk about it. And so first step often for people who really struggle to talk about stuff from their past is to write it.
That totally makes sense.
It's a way to bring it into your awareness to where you can start processing it and be able to eventually externalize.
Yeah. So there you go. So if you're not ready to talk about it yet, journaling is a great step one into becoming more self-aware. So, yeah. All right. Well, that's it.
That was a lot.
That was a lot. I know. We went through a lot of stuff here. In the next episode, guess what? Liz is going to be joining me again. Lucky Lizzie Bear. Oh, sorry, I told you. I said I wanted to call you Lizzie Bear. Lucky Liz here. We're going to explore grief because trauma and grief often go hand in hand. Not everybody will go through a traumatic experience possibly, but everybody will go through grief. And so it's important to look at. And so, for those of you who have been tuning in and you thought I was getting a podcast about how the body works. This sounds like a mental health podcast. Well, we are often more comfortable to talk about our physical health and separate it from our mental health. But what is going on in our mind impacts our body impacts our mind. It's a shared relationship. So it's really important that we consider these things. And so we're exploring in this episode, trauma, and then we're exploring grief because it might be actually a piece of your puzzle that you've been missing. You've gone through grief, or you're going through grief, and now you're seeing all these health changes, and you're wondering, what in the world's going on? I'm falling apart. We're going to talk about how grief can be a part of that, okay? And it's not the end of the story. right?
Yes.
Right? You can heal, and we're going to be talking more about that. So, if you do have specific questions, please comment. And if we have enough, we'll do a question and response. And it won't be this long. Possibly. We'll see. Okay. Well, I'm Rachel.
I'm Liz.
And I'm Derek.
And we are hoping to help you put the pieces of your health together. Talk to you later.